Welcome to Inspirational Leadership. I'm your host, Kristen Harcourt, and I'm super delighted to introduce you to today's guest. Today, we're going to be speaking with Ludmila Praslova. She was named as a member of Thinkers 50 Radar, a global group of 30 management thinkers whose ideas are most likely to shape the future of work. Dr. Praslova is a professor of industrial organizational psychology at Vanguard University of Southern California, who regularly writes for Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Psychology Today, Forbes, and is the author of The Canary Code. She is the first person to have published in Harvard Business Review from an autistic perspective, a talent strategy expert with extensive experience in global diversity and neurodiversity. She focuses her consulting on creating organizational systems for inclusion and well-being and providing neuroinclusion training to organizations such as Amazon, Bank of America, and MIT. She is also an avid open water swimmer, a gardener, and a poet. Welcome to the show, Ludmila.
Thank you, Kristen. It's so good to be here.
So, Ludmila, people always want to start off by getting to know you a little bit better and your journey and your backstory. So, tell us a little bit more around how you got to doing this work that you're doing in the world.
Well, as most people, you kind of fall into what you're doing, and there's some intentionality, but there's always a little bit of trial and error. But in my case, I just fell into doing global diversity back when I was in college, and there was just demand at the time. A lot of multinational companies and not-for-profits. The world was just kind of expanding for everyone. So my first kind of big job really was in intercultural relations. And even back then, it was bothering me that organizations could be very good at one aspect of what makes us all different and really oblivious to other aspects. So we could be really good in understanding that there are different national level cultures. But my organization in particular was kind of oblivious to gender differences.
Mhm.
And if you brought up disability, they probably really wouldn't know what to do with it. So it just bothered me that why can't we account for everything, every aspect of the human? And so when I went to do my doctoral work, I really wanted to figure out how to create organizations that are aware of all those differences within the individual and are able to support all those differences. So long story short, that took me decades, literally, to get to the point of neurodiversity. But then again, I looked at global cultures and social economic level as culture and all the other things that make us who we are. And then I obviously was thinking about it on the psychological level because I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. So we include all the levels from large cultures to individuals. But then I realized that I'm not just introvert. I'm not just an introvert, which is what I thought most of my life, but really I'm autistic because there's like don't bring up sensory sensitivities and noise because just it's always been there. Just never put it 2 plus 2 together because all of our diagnostic criteria are for 4-year-old boys. And it's very typical for girls to be missed. And then women, especially highly intelligent women, end up being discovered or figuring it out on their own much later in life. So that's actually not unusual. And then it was kind of a final piece because I started thinking about neurodiversity as an aspect of psychological level diversity. And if we create organizations that work for neurodivergent people, which by definition is just difference from what's expected or considered normal within a particular society, not the normal in quotes, because what's considered normal in modern America, it's not the same that was considered normal in ancient Egypt or medieval Germany. So it's really culturally determined. We talk about it as neuronormativity. So when you deviate in some substantial way from that normativity, life is kind of harder for you. But if we
Mm-hmm.
can create organizations that are flexible enough
Mm-hmm.
to accommodate those people who maybe feel things more intensely, maybe notice certain problems first, which is very typical for autistic and ADHD people, to notice things, to care about justice, and to really be more sensory sensitive to things like noise in open offices. It gets to everyone, but it impacts us more than others. So if we create organizations that can accommodate this level of psychological level diversity, on emotional level, on social level, on cognitive, on sensory level, we will really create organizations that are flexible enough for caregivers, for working students, and for people who are dealing with all kinds of things in life. So we're just going to create better organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's always interesting to see how you fall into the work and then to then see, oh, not only am I actually quite passionate about this work, I'm actually somebody that this work impacts me. And I didn't necessarily make that connection. It's interesting. I've had three or four friends, female friends, who are in that rate, like in the 45 to 55-year-old women who were just um, realized that they were autistic as well. And then they said, "Oh my gosh, it explains so much now." But they had just figured out different things for their coping strategies, but didn't really realize that was going on. And then now once they realized that, they said it's great because there's so many more books and podcasts and things that they're now accessing to be able to support themselves in even more ways, which I think is great because there's so many of these discussions happening right now. And thank you for also explaining what neurodiversity is, because I think sometimes people hear that word and they're just not understanding exactly, well, what does that mean, right? Because I think it's definitely a whole spectrum, but one person could not struggle with that area and somebody else struggles with a different area. And so it's being able to capture all of them. And so when you start to think about your book, The Canary Code, and I don't know, there's something around that imagery and the word canary that I just have to say I love. But when you start to think about the canaries and finding more of the canaries in the workplace and even supporting what that looks like, first of all, just tell me more a little bit around how did you come up with that title, and then tell me more about the concept.
Of course. Well, canaries are very cute and bright and colorful, and that's obviously a nice visual, but there's a very significant historical foundation to this idea. And many people use the term canary in coal mine, as in someone who, let's say, feels a danger early before others, or that
Right.
something is off, but they don't necessarily realize that it's not just an expression or a story. It's actually true historical fact that canaries were taken to coal mines for a very long time, and until 1980s. Canaries were only replaced by electronic carbon monoxide detectors in 1980s.
Okay.
So it's in living memory. And in UK, every mine was expected to employ two canaries. And they were taken to the mine, and they didn't just let them die. That's not necessarily true, but they would just monitor their distress. And if canary is not feeling well, then they would evacuate, and they would evacuate the humans. And they also had a little canary resuscitation devices where they would actually give them oxygen. So
Okay.
it was just a little cage where they would be able to stream oxygen.
Yeah.
Uh, but definitely not the job that anybody wants.
Right.
And it's a good thing they're not used in that way. But so canaries actually saved many lives. And it's not because canaries are broken or sick. That's another misconception. It's by design. Canary has a more intense oxygen metabolism,
Okay.
and it metabolizes air on inhale and on exhale.
Okay.
And that's why it's going to be impacted faster because it has more intense metabolism by design. That allows her to be a bird and do what birds do.
Yeah.
And then it's a very close analogy. Let's say autistic ADHD person have very strong justice sensitivity in the workplace. Autistic person is going to be impacted by noisy environment and be able to say that it's a problem. Other people will not be able to actually pinpoint why they're getting stressed out, but it might
Mm.
actually still impact
Mm.
their heartbeat and their physiological reactions. They
Yeah.
just won't be able to report that it's noise that's getting to them.
Yeah.
So when people who are reporting sensory sensitivities and unhealthy environments, you really do need to pay attention to it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for explaining that backstory because I'm not familiar with it and how that worked in the minds. So when you start to think about organizations, and organizations thinking more about this, right? Like, okay, what can we be aware of? So, not waiting until people are letting them know, which I think is also great if people are saying, this is not working for me, and then coming up with other ways to adapt. But if we start to think about being proactive, right? So, there might be an HR leader or CEO that's listening right now, and they're saying, I want to proactively do things to create an environment, to create a culture that's thinking about ways to be able to support neurodivergent humans. What can they start to be thinking about? What are some of those questions they can be asking?
Well, again, it does depend on your organization, and the best place to start is to ask people what are the common barriers or stressors.
Yeah.
And you could do it in a pretty structured way. So, my book is organized around employment cycle,
Okay.
how you write job descriptions, design jobs, select people, onboard people, develop leadership, and so forth. So, if you think about all those aspects, if we can say, okay, let's make sure that we actually hear from people who are impacted by that process. Let's make it transparent. Let's make it as flexible as possible. Those are all principles that could be applied on all of those levels. But if you want to start doing something in your organization and you want a quick win,
Mm,
and if you want to get support, then my first principle is participation.
yeah.
Ask your people. You might have, wonderful offices, but everyone is frustrated because nobody understands how promotion works. It's
Right.
so non-transparent and so hush-hush that you're losing good people. So fix that, and then you will get a lot of support for fixing other things. In other organizations, it literally could be that office is making people sick, and we do know that open office actually literally increase sickness absence substantially.
Yeah.
So just find out what is bothering your organization, and then just make sure that you are considering the entire employment life cycle. One thing that people very often inclined to do, oh, let's just hire more. Well, let's just
Mm,
create a special hiring program,
right.
which is not necessarily where you want to start, because why are you doing this, and what environment you're bringing people into, and why do you need a special hiring program? Why can't you just make the whole environment more flexible? So there are good questions to ask because I mean, it's wonderful to have those special hiring programs, but it's a very small percentage of people that could be hired through those. Improving how organization functions in general creates way more opportunity and brings in a lot more talent into the organization.
Yeah, I think it's so important what you're saying there. And let's start, like for people that want to understand, and I definitely recommend reading the book that will go into more detail. But when you start to think about that employee life cycle. So starting from the beginning, maybe we can talk about some of those different areas. So we're first looking at, you started to talk to the job posting, right? So part one, you don't even have the people in the organization yet. So talk me through some of the things you can be thinking about when it comes to recruitment and talent management and onboarding.
All right. Well, first, it's designing your job
Yeah.
because you want to know that it actually reflects what needs to be done. Because too often, and we all know people in HR are busy, so they just cut and paste
Yeah.
from, older postings or someone else's postings, and it ends up being a kitchen sink.
Yeah.
So you need someone who is going to do statistical analysis with frequent interruptions, like a literal line from uh, a posting, which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Nobody should be doing statistical analysis with frequent
Yeah.
interruptions,
Yeah.
but especially a neurodivergent person is not going to apply for that job.
Yeah.
And so just a reasonable job design and focus on key functions and not the random personality things that people say. No, you do not need ninja something
Yeah.
by fast-paced environment just because everyone puts it in their ads.
Yeah.
Accurately describe your environment. If it actually is fast-paced or disorganized, say so.
Yeah.
But if not, just not necessarily, and focus on what it is that you're actually hiring for. And then design your selection based on it. One thing that really gets people is the traditional interview.
Hmm.
Let's say I want a job as a chef and I'm really
Hmm.
good at it.
Hmm.
I'm great at cooking and I'm very creative. And then I'm just asked to verbally describe what I'm doing and project a perky personality. And what exactly is the point? You're not measuring what I'm able to do in the kitchen or what I'm able to do with a spreadsheet. So if you're hiring an actor, by all means,
Right.
look at their acting performance. But for some reason, everyone needs to pass a test of acting performance and look people in the eye. And to most jobs, it's not even relevant. So look at the specific job and make sure that you design valid selection that actually measures skills relevant to the job. And very often you can give someone 10, 20-minute um, slice of a job to perform, and
Hmm.
you're going to end up with a much better assessment than just talking about random things and what they like to do when they were 10.
I think before we go to the next section, I think this is a really important one that I see a lot. I've had organizations where they're trying to hire for very technical roles, it might be engineering, a variety of different positions. And then they'll be evaluating them based on, oh, they didn't have a lot of presence and they didn't have, I'm like, that's, first of all, an interview already for many people is a higher stress situation. Like it's unnatural. You're being asked questions in a way that you wouldn't normally be asked questions. You're trying to, some people, their way of processing, they need time to take in the information, and you're asking them to come up with answers really quickly. And I don't think it's exactly like you said, you think you're evaluating is not actually what you're evaluating. Like you're evaluating their ability to show up in an interview, but that has nothing to do with their ability to actually be able to do the job. And I really, really appreciate your recommendation around work samples. Again, like you said with the actor, if somebody's in sales and they're going to be in day out needing to shake hands and build relationships, and sure, have them do that, have them practice doing a presentation. Yet, 80% of the jobs or 50% of the jobs where they're interviewing are not requiring that. And I think there's way, way, way too much emphasis on that. And it's unfortunate because I think a lot of organizations miss out on some really, really good talent because of that.
Exactly. And then hiring fails because you're really not selecting for what you need. You selected all those super extroverted people, and then they end up not even liking those introverted jobs that you're asking them to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And they're just studying instead of doing what they are hired to be doing because interviewed for something that wasn't the actual job. It doesn't make any sense for anybody.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I don't know if you know this statistically, not even just from the neurodivergent perspective, but from the extroverted, introverted perspective. I think I remember seeing a stat one time that it's actually like very close to 50%, like 50% extroverted, 50% introverted. Like the world is filled with a lot of introverted people, yet the interview is set up for extroverted people. And it's not having bearing on whether they have the skills to do the job.
Yes, and it's even more interesting. There's some oldish research on team composition, and it said that actually on your team you want 60% of introverts and
Right.
40% of introverts as an ideal uh, team that's going to do its job.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make also any sense why you're hiring for extroversion. So there's a lot of interesting things, and yes, obviously, um, if you are hiring but even if you're hiring salespeople,
Mm-hmm.
there are introverts who are excellent at sales. So
Mm-hmm.
you need to
Mm-hmm.
give them a sample of how they sell something and not just
Yeah.
assume that gregariousness is going to do it, because sometimes you're so gregarious you annoy people to no end.
Yes, that's such a good point because a lot of times when you think about consultative selling, why people are so good at consultative selling is they're very good at listening and asking questions and connecting dots and then being able to reflect back. And sometimes, and again, this isn't about extroversion, the introversion are good or bad. I think it's just having self-awareness. But sometimes with that really, really high extroversion, they aren't spending as much time listening and are more wanting to jump in, which is something I also comment on. And I want to circle back to what you said around having diverse teams, that there can sometimes be challenges too with the extrovert is always feeling that they need to be talking and not giving space for other people in the room to be speaking who have a lot to share, but they aren't necessarily the ones who are going to jump in because they don't feel the need to jump in all the time.
Which is why we need to organize meetings better, because
Hmm.
obviously telling people to be quiet all the time is also annoying and not nice.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
if we just create work norms where it's not just the only thought that counts is the first thought that is expressed,
yes.
but we allow people input before, after, in writing, in variety of ways, and then people don't feel like they're going to be evaluated on whether they jumped in first with a half-baked thought, but it doesn't matter. All that matters is speed. Then people are also going to be more likely to just stand back and take a little bit time to think. But other than that, obviously, you need all kinds of personalities in the workplace. Just match them to where their energy aligns with the actual performance, and just put people in the right place, and you're going to have much more effective and happy workforce.
Exactly, exactly. So walk me through that. So there's somebody who they've now hired, and so we've got now people who are within the organization. And so when we start to think about onboarding, getting them into the new role, and then starting to get them up to speed, what should we be aware of in this area?
Well, the typical concept of onboarding is sometimes it's just like the first day of orientation, but it's obviously much more of a process. It can even start with pre-boarding, where you offer people, would you like to come in for a day, or meet your mentor, or just a pal before, because so many people have anxiety, and many Gen Zs never been in the physical work environment, and they report high levels of anxiety. But then, of course, anyone can have anxiety, Gen X and baby boomers and whoever.
Yeah.
So offer people a little bit of an easing in ways, even as a pre-boarding, and don't make it just about filling out the form. Then
Yeah.
your first day that people dread sometimes, because you're going to meet 50 people. Somehow you're supposed to remember all of their names, and
Yeah.
somehow you're supposed to like walk around the entire campus, and it can be a really big one. And somehow you're trying to not to faint, and sometimes somehow you're trying to make a positive impression. And if you are on board with a bunch of people from different areas and made to do some kind of icebreaker, that can just really put you over. And so many people really don't want to do those icebreakers with strangers. So give people options and split it between several days. So what needs to be done on day one? And that a human brain can reasonably process. And
Yeah.
then which things can come on day two, day three, and then, in week three, when they kind of know where the bathroom is and they have a little bit more mental space to process additional elements of what is happening. So, and then think about it again as not as one day and now you're onboarded somehow, but spread it out. Some people define it as 90 days. Some organizations, especially if you hire for the long haul,
Mm.
like in higher education, you sometimes like spend your first full year
Mm-hmm.
doing various new
Mm-hmm.
person activities.
Yeah.
And that does tend to work a little bit better than, okay, here's the fire hose day one, go do things. And obviously give people options, because sometimes it's just like, okay, so everybody's going to do paintball. Well, some people really don't want to do paintball, other people
Mm-hmm.
can't do paintball, or you
Mm-hmm.
put people in a situation where they have to disclose a disability on day one, because you
Mm-hmm.
force them to do something that has nothing to do with their actual job, but
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those icebreakers that someone has to say, uh, run away to the bathroom crying and then disclose that they have anxiety,
Yeah.
or they're forced to do something physical and they're forced to disclose that they have a mass. Like, how much worse can your first day be?
Yeah.
So just be really careful with putting people into situations that have nothing to do with their actual job performance,
Yeah.
but just require them to do all those random things that can stress them out for no good reason.
I think that I really appreciate what you said there too around it's making me think of something I think organizations need to be aware of is those times where they try to do the one size fits all. Because even from a pre-boarding, right? One person might say, "Ooh, this would really help me to be," as you said, like I'm just thinking back when I started some of my jobs, I would love that if I got to have a little bit of one-on-one time for a couple of hours and eased in because it did feel so intimidating. Whereas for somebody else, it's something else that might make a big difference. And I think, I think to many, many team building exercises, which I continue to hear from many of my clients, and some of them would fit into the category that you've just shared there, that I think we need to be discerning and think a little bit around some of those that, again, I think it comes from a great place. It comes from a great intention, but we need to take a step back and recognize that we don't know some of the invisible challenges, invisible disabilities that people might be experiencing that would make something like that. Paintball's, I think, a great example that is going to create struggles that you're not aware of.
Right. I tell my story also in the chapter on onboarding. That's pretty wild because I had a pretty wild onboarding experience. And it just create a no pressure cafeteria of
Yeah.
options for people,
Yeah.
where they can pick and choose and just create a positive experience that they're going to remember as a good situation, not a nightmare.
Yes, yes, yes. So to walk me in now, let's think about we've got our current employees and our current organization. What are some things we can be, there's a lot of leaders who are listening to this conversation and they want to create an environment that's supporting their team. Maybe they're starting to hear what we're talking about right now and realize, oh, this sounds a little bit like one of my team members. And maybe there's some things I could be doing a bit differently, whether that comes to one-on-one meetings, whether that comes to how meetings for the whole team are taking place. What are some things, first of all, let's look on two levels. Let's look at the leadership, so people managers, what could they be thinking about? And then we'll talk about from HR's perspective, some of the things that they could be coaching the organization when it comes to supporting current employees.
And yes, again, there's the whole menu of things. that you could be doing as a leader. And in general, I mentioned platinum leadership in my book. So trying not to say, okay, there's just one style that works. That's just not true. Or what works for me is going to work for other people, because the golden rule doesn't really work, because other people are very different from you. So trying to find out how the other person functions and try to tailor it to them is something that's extremely helpful. But then it's not just you. And sometimes leaders do not necessarily realize what is happening in their units, because we have so many people who practice kiss up, kick down.
Yeah.
And very often people don't even believe that there's bullying in their units.
Mm.
And there is. But because this person practices kissing up, they don't know how horrible they are to others. So I think just being aware of the actual dynamics and being aware that you experience things a little bit differently,
Mhm.
and trying to figure out how experience works for someone with less power, which could be dramatically different,
Yeah.
is very important. So just be aware of power dynamics and how your perception of what's going on in your unit can be um, skewed by having more power.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's just one thing. Just happen to be talking to people about bullying today, but
Yes.
um, yeah, definitely meeting structure and just overall being very cognizant of whether the general social norms are accepted.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about some of the organizations that you've been able to work with and seen some of the before and afters that you've been really proud of, right? So that you've gone in with the organization and maybe they didn't have things going on and they weren't aware of it, but then through them asking more things from their employees, what have been some of those great things that you've seen organizations do that that maybe an organization will hear this and they'll feel inspired?
Well, that actually kind of works with the next step, professional development, professional growth, promotions. So for so many organizations, it's the point where they lose talent, because people are just trying to get um, some form of advancement. Nobody knows what's happening. It's all secretive. People get frustrated. Good people leave. And then nobody likes people who get promoted because they're actually not very nice to anybody but the bosses. And so creating transparent, clear processes for
Hmm.
professional development, for leadership, and even redefining leadership and leadership pipelines from, again, this old idea that yes, it just has to be someone who talks all the time and has this forceful personality and wears their energy in a certain way. That's not all leadership all about. Some people are very good at quietly developing one person. Some people are good at talking in front of the large group. Some people are really good at looking at data and deriving strategy from it. So we can't just have this one size fits all leadership pipeline. So that's the area of my passion is redesigning um, not just leadership pipeline, but professional growth pipeline, because even people who don't want to manage people still want to grow.
Hmm.
So development from um, individual contributor to super expert. Uh,
Hmm.
that's professional development.
Hmm.
Development not to people management, but to strategic and database type of leadership. Just expanding people's idea of what is potential, because we just have such a narrow view on high potential. And if you don't fit into that limited idea, then people just kind of write you off. And there are so many people who just want to do things better, on a higher level and have impact in variety of ways, not just this one way where you just build an empire and have lots of reporting lines to you, because that's not necessarily one way to think about advancement. But there are many people who want to grow professionally in many ways that can also benefit organizations. So I really like redesigning those um, talent pipelines.
Yeah, I found that to be huge when organizations have done more career pathing, because my experience is there's a lot of people that just feel the only thing you're supposed to do if you're continuing to be promoted is to move into leadership. They get into leadership and they're actually quite miserable. They actually don't want to do it, but they don't know any other options. And sometimes there aren't other options because the organization is not looking. And, I think it's a great way to innovate and be creative and find other ways where that great talent can still stay with you, but still feel like you said they're from a professional development perspective, they're growing, they're getting to contribute in different ways. But I think it requires sometimes the organization to think outside of the box around creating some of those roles that perhaps they haven't ever imagined.
Yes, and there's just so many ways to contribute and so many paths that do not require people management. And because there are many people who do not like people management and should not be doing people
Yes,
management,
agreed.
but they are capable of high-level strategic leadership. And
Yeah.
there should be a path to that strategic, maybe it's product leadership.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of ways through which people can go through leadership, but we keep equating it with one-on-one people management and make it a required step. And we end up with miserable people on both sides and miserable organizations. And that's a horrible waste of talent.
Yeah, and to be honest, I actually think it's a gap in many organizations that they could start to think about for different ways of approaching that. Because I agree, like I can think of some individuals that I've supported in the past, or just me hearing stories about the individuals in the organization, and ultimately they ended up losing that talent because they didn't think of other ways. And let me be clear, these are not toxic individuals, right? Like I'm not saying that you're not a people manager, but so you're not going to be leading people, but you can just be toxic over here. So I just want to, if anybody's listening, we're not saying that. We're not saying toxic or bullying or any of that. But they're just like where when they're in their zone of genius and they're using their gifts and talents, they could be looking at, like you said, around the strategic ways and really helping the organization and using their skills in that way, which is incredibly valuable to the organization, as opposed to doing what we know lots of people managers do, which is managing the people and having many conversations on a daily basis to help mentor and coach them. And that's not how they're best used or best served.
Exactly. So I spent quite a bit of a big chunk of a chapter on outlining professional development pathways that are other than people management. Again, there are people who do it and love it and want to do it, which is fantastic, but we do need other types of leadership. I also have a story of someone who loved being a people manager, but then they promoted him into strategic management, and he was miserable because he did not like those spreadsheets and
Yeah.
what he had to do in his supposedly higher and higher paid level. But that's not who he was, because he wanted to do one-on-one with people.
Yeah.
And just understanding that those different clusters of talents do not necessarily work in a way that those artificial career ladders work in organizations, but there's just so much talent that falls off those ladders for no reason, because they're poorly designed and they're one size fits all. And we just need to think about all kinds of, curving creative paths.
Yes, yes, I agree. When we start to think about this, the name of the show, which is Inspirational Leadership, I'm curious from your perspective, and definitely also bringing in the neurodivergent lens. When you think about leaders, what are those qualities that you would like to see in people leaders that are really supporting a neurodivergent culture?
Well, again, you can be a good leader in many different ways. You can be a quiet advocate. You can be someone who discloses their own differences and sets an example.
Yeah.
You could be a person who really likes designing procedures and manuals, and you can design procedures that are going to be transparent and inclusive. You can be someone who wants to write about it. You can be someone who just wants to develop and coach people one on one. So caring is one thing that's non-negotiable,
Yeah.
but how you express it can align with whatever other talents you have.
Yeah.
Just since you're
Beautiful.
caring expressed in whatever channel through whatever talents you have.
Right, right. Absolutely. I think care, I mean, we talk a lot about humanizing the workplace and showing up with humanity in our organizations. And I think you would definitely agree that we can never have too much humanity in our workplaces.
Yes, definitely. And and that's something that I keep returning to. Humanity and honoring human dignity that just covers so much. And after this foundation is there, that you're going to honor everyone's human dignity. Uh, you can just do it in a variety of ways. And then hopefully there's a balance in your team that other people will be doing it in other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this conversation, and I know we could keep on talking, but as we start to wrap up, I want to give you an opportunity to leave with the audience whatever is showing up for you in this moment as a final thought.
Well, we talked about leadership a lot, but one thing I really like to talk about is neurodivergent leaders. There are so many people who may not necessarily know neurodivergent, and then they discover they're neurodivergent, and they're wondering if it's going to ruin their career, and that's why they're going to keep quiet, or they only disclose when there are problems. And that doesn't always look good. You know, someone has had a long career and then they disclose because they got in trouble. So it's such a personal thing, and I don't ever want to tell someone, risk your career in a completely unsafe organization. But just one thing we all need to recognize that there are way more neurodivergent people than we realize. But we also need to create collectively the kind of safety where people on all levels of organization are free to talk about who they are. And if you are a relatively well-established person who has been making good income for a long time and is relatively established in life, you do have more power to do it than someone who is just entering the workplace or trying to come back after raising their family and has no savings and no security.
Yeah.
So uh, it really helps to know that there are neurodivergent people in leadership, and whether or not they just know that they're there and create better pipelines. But anyone who has been wondering whether or not disclose again, it's everyone's personal decision. I just feel like I have to disclose to do this work,
Yeah.
and honestly with my conscience. But that's just one thing, that if you think there's an appropriate point in your career,
Yeah.
I think it just helps so many people.
Yes. I think that's a beautiful invitation. I love that. Ludmila, where can people learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
It's very easy. It's either my name, Ludmila
Yeah.
Praslova, or
Yeah.
the Canary Code.
Okay.
If you Google my name, usually my LinkedIn is going to come up as the
Yes.
first thing.
Yes.
And that's the easiest way to connect with me. And my book website is also the Canary Code.
Yeah.
My book is the Canary Code, and all of my social media is just on my real name. So
Amazing.
it's pretty easy.
Amazing. And we'll have all of that for everyone in the show notes, so it'll be easy for you to just jump on the link as well. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Christian. Thank you for this lovely conversation.
And for everybody listening, if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to share it with someone else who might be able to benefit from it. And thank you for your reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. They help to get the podcast in front of more leaders. And if you're looking to develop more confident, emotionally intelligent leaders in your organization, or if you're personally ready to grow as a leader, let's connect. I'd love to share more about my one on one coaching, transformational keynotes, and ongoing leadership training. Wherever you are listening in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, sending tons of love. Bye bye.